Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. You know, the way that I come up with my podcast may surprise some of you. I don't know. But I generally come up with them literally on the fly. I'm walking to the place where my computer is, and I just think, what do I want to talk about now? And it comes to me. I don't know why that is. I don't know why I do it that way. Maybe you could argue that I should have things planned out better, but I don't. I have never planned out my lectures. When I was lecturing, I would also lecture off the cuff. Again, apologies for my eye. Again, no pain, but I realize it looks kind of ugly. I do plan to get some sunglasses tomorrow, which is from a recommendation from my friend Steve, and I will take up his recommendation and do that tomorrow. Um, what I wanted to discuss today or tonight, my time, is the subject of religion. I am a sociologist of religion and a social theorist. Those are my two specializations in sociology. Sociology of religion, which is a part of the broader field of religious studies, and social theory, sometimes called sociological theory. Some people make a distinction between social and sociological theory. I generally do not. I use them kind of interchangeably. But today, I'm not going to be talking about social theory, which is really what I talk about a lot, perhaps most of the time, although I don't use that term. I'm going to be talking about religion. When I look around the world, especially at a lot of indigenous places in the world, what I see are a lot of native religions. For example, give you a kind of really extreme example. There is this tribe in Latin America, I believe Brazil, but I'm not positive about that, where there's a shaman, a member of the tribe, who administers the so-called magic mushroom. There are people from all over the world who travel to that particular spot in Latin America to receive the magic mushroom. I don't understand this, and I'm not going to try to explain it. I assume it's some kind of neurological reaction, but it seems that everyone who takes that mushroom in that when they go down to that tribe has the same exact experience. They are laying on a like a surgery table, a surgical table, um, and uh, and there are all these little people standing around them. What does that mean? I have no idea. But that's the experience that almost everyone apparently has when they go down to that tribe. And it seems as though they have it even when they are not told about others. Because you could argue that, well, maybe that's what they expect because they heard other people had that experience. No, even if they don't know about that, even if they're the only person they know who has ever gone to this particular tribe, they have that same experience. Um, that is one of the important facets of that particular religion. When we think of religions, ordinarily, we think of first world religions. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had experiences primarily in two major religions. When they were in Germany, it would have been the Lutheran Church, which is the dominant church in Germany. When they moved to the UK, to England specifically, it would have been the Anglican Communion, which in the United States, in my country, is known as the Episcopal Church. Same thing. same exact denomination headed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Just two different names, but same religion. Now, Marx and Engels were not religious scholars. They were not sociologists of religion. They were not specialists in religious studies. Their knowledge was limited about religion. Now, whether they knew about other religions, maybe, perhaps. I assume that Marx knew a bit about Judaism, since that was his background, although he wasn't born into a Jewish home, practicing Jewish home. Sadly, as many of you might know, Marx was also an anti-Semite, which is not something that I'm very pleased about as somebody who comes from an Ashkenazi Jewish family myself. But as a Marxist, I don't worship Marx. I don't worship Engels. I follow the ideas of Marxism and the ideas of Marxism as they were developed over the decades by various other people. So the fact that Marx was imperfect, well, I'm imperfect too. I'm obviously not an anti-Semite, but I have my own imperfections. We all have our own imperfections. So what? Maybe I shouldn't say so what, because that's pretty bad, and it does make me feel bad. And but what I mean by so what is that we should not assume that anybody is without their flaws. We're all flawed people. We all have our limitations. So the fact that Marx was an anti-Semite, yeah, I mean, that's horrible. That's tragic. I wish he were not. But he was also a human being. And Germans at that time, and of course well into the 20th century, were commonly anti-Semitic. The unusual thing is that Marx himself had Jewish ancestry, but that also was not unusual. There were many other people of Jewish ancestry in Germany who were also anti-Semites. So Marx was not alone. Okay, so the two religions that we know for sure that Marx and Engels knew about were Lutheranism and the Anglican Communion. How much would they have known, for example, about indigenous religions throughout the world? Say the voodoo traditions and traditions related to them. Say Buddhism, say Taoism, say the various branches of Hinduism, say Confucianism, which some would argue is not exactly a religion, say Taoism, say Sikhism. I doubt they knew hardly anything at all about them. Maybe they literally knew nothing. If you would raise the subject, what is Sikhism? Could Marx and Engels give an intelligible response? I doubt it. So, the famous phrase, religion is the opium of the masses, by Marx. Okay. That phrase has been commonly used to justify the assertion that Marx and Marxism, I suppose by extension, is anti-religious, and that one cannot be a religious person or a theist, for example, or a polytheist or whatever, and be a Marxist. That is not true. There have throughout history been many Marxists who were devoutly religious. Someone whom I have discussed before several times, Paulo Freire, the founder of critical pedagogy, was, for example, both a Marxist and a devout Roman Catholic. So that notion that somehow Marxism is inherently anti-religious is simply not true. So What did Marx mean when he said that religion is the opium of the people or the masses? Simple. Well, at least it's simple to me since I've studied it, maybe not to anybody else or to other people who might have read the statement for the first time. What does opium do? That's a question I would frequently ask to my students. Opium is a painkiller. It kills both physical pain and mental pain. So if you are feeling really, really hurt emotionally, opium can take away that pain. If you are feeling physical pain, opium can also take away that kind of pain. Opium is a really effective painkiller. What Marx was saying, I believe, is that religion takes away the pain of suffering, especially if you are a member of the proletariat and you are being oppressed. So, for example, in the United States, where we have this horrible legacy of Black slavery, some, not all, but some slave owners, and it seems it's difficult for me even to say slave owners, but that's the reality of history. Some slave owners would encourage their slaves to attend church, obviously a Black church, not a white church, but a Black church. And there were many Black churches that slaves attended. In fact, in many cases, unbeknownst to the slave owners, those Black churches became the staging grounds for many revolutionary activities and planned revolutionary activities. That was someplace that the slaves could go where white people would not follow them. And so they could be on their own and plan on doing something, and the white slave owners would be unaware of it. So it was useful in that regard. Now, was that the reason why the slave owners were encouraging the slaves to go to church? No. It appears to be that the slave owners thought, well, if we send our slaves to church, and if they are taught in church that there is a heaven, that there is an afterlife, and that the suffering get rewarded. Well, slaves obviously suffered. They suffered tremendously. On the cotton fields, and in some cases working in the homes of the slave owners. They were oppressed. They were not paid for their labor. And yet their labor was extensive. So they literally were the objects of tremendous persecution, and their suffering is truly unimaginable to me. I simply can't imagine being a slave. I can think about it, but can I imagine it? Not really imagine it. Not really imagine it. I mean, I have no reference point to imagine it. I've never experienced anything like that. I feel awful when I think about it. Imagine it? No. No, I think if I said so, I would be lying. If I said that I could imagine it, I would be lying. But these slaves, in their suffering, in the view of the slave owners, would begin to feel, well, okay, in this world, I may be suffering. In this world, living in this world, I may be forced to work without being paid. In this world, I may be compelled to be on the cotton fields for long hours or do other tasks that white people were never expected to do, including lifting very heavy equipment. But Jesus also suffered. Jesus was on the cross, the Passion of Christ. He was crucified and he died. Jesus had a very difficult life. And so the thought was, well, if these slaves could identify with Jesus and the other people who were reported as being suffering in the biblical texts who follow Jesus, then maybe they would not object to the fact that they are being enslaved. That, I believe, and it's not only me, but I can only speak for myself since I'm talking, that I believe was the justification for sending these Black slaves to churches, or at least allowing them to attend churches. So, in effect, those churches or their church attendance was like an opium. It made them, in the eyes of the slave owners, forget about their suffering and instead think, well, yeah, I'm suffering now, but Jesus also suffered. So by suffering now, I am being like Jesus. He suffered and I am suffering right now. So, in effect, it was a trick that was being pulled by the slave owners. The slave owners could care less whether the slaves went to church, my opinion. They didn't care about the Christian concept of salvation for the slaves. They cared about their own economic concerns. And the southern US was a slave-based economy. That's why when slavery ended in the South experienced a massive economic catastrophe that it took decades to recover from because they no longer had slaves. Now, when slavery ended, did all the slaves suddenly pick up and say, whoa, I'm free, I can leave? No. Why? Indoctrination, socialization. When you grow up in an environment that is oppressive, when that is all you know, even if you are given the opportunity to leave, oftentimes you don't. A contemporary example. Many battered women physically and emotionally abused by their husbands, will stay in the home despite that abuse. I have heard people, honestly, I have heard people blame the women. Why didn't those women simply pick up and leave? If they were being abused, they should have left. No, it wasn't. It wasn't their fault. They were not abusing themselves. Their husbands were abusing them, just like the slave owners were abusing the slaves. So you don't blame the slaves or the former slaves once the slaves were liberated for staying in the households on the plantations without being paid in some cases after slavery ended. You blame the master. You blame the mistress for keeping those individuals, whether they were slaves or former slaves, in that home, for not providing an education for them, a means of getting out and making something out of their lives. So, the concept that Marxism is by definition anti-religious is simply not true. Now, was Marx a religious man? Was Engels a religious man? No, they were not religious men, personally. Although, as I mentioned, there have been many religious Marxists, including me, including Paulo Freire. But the possibility of being a devoutly religious person and simultaneously a Marxist is not contradictory. And there is no place in the writings of either Marx or Engels where there is a prohibition against practicing religion, or even where practicing religion is discouraged. What is discouraged is not practicing religion, but being victimized by it, which is what the slave owners were doing. They were using Christianity, or a type of Christianity, mostly Baptist Christianity, as a mechanism to force compliance on the part of the slaves. You never blame the victim. You always blame the victimizer. You never blame the oppressed. You always blame the oppressor. That's pretty commonly accepted these days. Not by everyone, but by, I would say, most people, at least most people I know. Maybe people I know are not typical, I don't know. But I suspect most people would not argue too strongly against that. And yet, this mythology that Marxism is inherently anti-religious has persisted to the present day, in spite of the fact that it is simply not true. And the idea should simply be left to rot away and be replaced with a more accurate, a more sophisticated understanding of what Marx and Engels actually said. This is Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.